I'm mad, people. I'm going to be making this video for those people in the back that haven't been paying attention. News coming out of Washington, D.C. already is kind of disturbing on these, not news out of Washington, D.C. Excuse me, let me clarify. News out of Mar-a-Lago is not good so far, folks. So let me help you guys figure out what it is that you have all voted for. Sorry, this thing keeps sliding down. I'm here today, angry, raw, unfiltered, no hair, no makeup, tired eyes because I've been sleeping, but I've also been trying to make plans for my family to survive this new, as Putin just put it yesterday, new world order that's currently in the process of being built. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be doing a Project 2025 reading for those of you who, would rather listen to somebody read it or don't have time to read it or think it's too much to take in. I myself have just been listening to excerpts, pieces, bits, and things, and the only media videos I've really seen concerning, people making something has been cartoons, right? And it kind of makes light of the mandate. So, ladies and gentlemen, even though comments will be turned off on my videos until I have posted the very last reading, because I don't foresee being able to read this all in one sitting. After I have posted all of the videos of the reading of the mandate, I will then hopefully have enough followers where we can go live and discuss amongst ourselves our thoughts on what this mandate says and not what anybody else says, okay? We're not listening to the politicians. We're not listening. This is the mandate. Donald Trump today just hired the man who wrote the mandate. So we must know what is in the mandate. Let's go. Mandate for Leadership, the Conservative Promise. Project 2025, Presidential Transition Project. It says copyright 2023 by the Heritage Foundation, and we all know who these people are. Gives their address and phone number and website and all the, usual printing stuff. Mandate for Leadership, the Conservative Promise. Forwarded by Kevin D. Roberts, edited by Paul Dans and Stephen Groves. Then we get down here to, where it tells you what all the chapters are and blah, blah, blah. Acknowledgements. We're going to read everything here, people. I'm not going to leave it out. It's all important. This work, Mandate for Leadership 2025, the Conservative Promise, is a collective effort of hundreds of volunteers who have banded together in the spirit of advancing positive change for America. Our work is by no means the comprehensive compendium of conservative policies, nor is our group the exclusive cadre of conservative thinkers. The ideas expressed in this volume are not necessarily shared by all. What unites us is the drive to make our country better. First and foremost, we thank the chapter authors and contributors who give so freely of their time in service of their country. We were particularly grateful to have the help of dedicated members of the Heritage Foundation management and policy teams, Executive Vice President Derek Morgan, Chief of Staff Wesley Cooper Smith, Associate Director of Project 2025, Spencer Creation, and Thomas A. Rowe, Institute for Economic Policy Studies. Director Paul Ray devoted significant amount of their valuable time to reviewing and editing the lengthy manuscript and provided expert advice and insight. The job of transforming the work of dozens of authors and hundreds of contributors into a cohesive manuscript fell upon the Heritage's formidable team of editors led by Director of Research Editors Teresa Penfather, Senior Editor William T. Poole, Marla Hess, Jessica Lowther, Katrina Rollins, Catherine Santuaro. Without those tireless efforts, you would not be reading these words. I may pronounce names wrong. Sorry. Where were we? Without those tireless efforts, you would not be reading these words. The talented work of Data Graphics Services Manager John Fleming, Manager of Web Development and Print Projects Jay Simon, Director of Marketing Elizabeth Finder, Senior Graphic Designer Grace DeSandro, and Senior Designer Melissa Bluey came together to bring the volume to life. We also thank the dedicated junior staff who provided immeasurable assistance, especially Jordan Embry, Sarah Calvis, and Jonathan Moy. Most important, we are grateful to the leadership, supporters, donors of each of the Project 2025 Advisory Board member organizations and those of the Heritage Foundation, without whom Project 2025 would not be possible. Thank you, Paul Dans and Stephen Groves. Let's hydrate. The Project 2025 Advisory Board. And I guarantee we should, at the end of the reading of this, make some more videos researching these places on the advisory board. You know, full transparency. We have the Alabama Policy Institute, Alliance Defending Freedom, American Compass, the American Conservative, the American First Legal Foundation, American Accountability Foundation, American Center for Law and Justice, American Cornerstone Institute, American Council of Trustees and Alumni, American Legislative Exchange Council, the American Main Street Initiative, American Moment, American Principles Project, Center for Equal Opportunity, Center for Family Human Rights, Center for Immigration Studies, Center for Renewing America, Claremont Institute, Coalition for a Prosperous America, Competitive Enterprise Institute, Conservative Partnership Institute, Concerned Women for America, Defense of Freedom Institute, Ethics and Public Policy Center, Family Policy Alliance, Family Research Council, First Liberty Institute, Forge Leadership Network, Foundation for Defense of Democracies, Foundation for Government Accountability, Freedom Works, the Heritage Foundation, Hillsdale College, Honest Elections Project, Independent Women's Forum, Institute for the American Worker, Institute for Energy Research, Institute for Women's Health, Intercollegiate Studies Institute, James Madison Institute, Keystone Policy, Leadership Institute, Liberty University, National Association of Scholars, National Center for Public Policy Research, Pacific Research Institute, Patrick Henry College, Personnel Policy Operations, Recovery for America Now Foundation, 1792 Exchange, Susan B. Anthony, Pro-Life America, Texas Public Policy Foundation, Teneo Network, Young American Foundation. Wow. A lot of things I've never heard of, only one or two that have ring a bell, and all of them sound fairly new. Okay, we have a note on Project 2025. We want you. The 2025 Presidential Transition Project is a conservative movement's unified effort to be ready for the next conservative administration to govern at 12 noon, January 20th, 2025. Welcome to the mission. By opening this book, you are now a part of it. Indeed, one set of eyes reading these passages will be those of the 47th President of the United States. And we hope every other reader will join in making the incoming administration a success. History teaches that a president's power to implement an agenda is at its apex during the administration's opening days. To execute requires a well-conceived, coordinated, unified plan and a trained and committed cadre of personnel to implement it. In recent election cycles, presidential candidates normally began transition planning in the late spring of election year or even after the party's nomination was secured. That is too late. The federal government's complexity and growth advance at a seemingly logarithmic rate every 4 years. For conservatives to have a fighting chance to take on the administrative state and reform our federal government, the work must start now. The entirety of this effort is to support the next conservative president, whoever he or she may be. In the winter of 1980, the fledgling Heritage Foundation handed to President-elect Ronald Reagan the inaugural mandate for leadership. This collective work by conservative thought leaders and former government hands, most of whom were not part of Heritage, set out policy prescriptions agency by agency for the incoming president. The book literally put the conservative movement and Reagan on the same page, and the revolution that followed might never have been, save for this band of committed and volunteer activists. With this volume, we have gone back to the future and then some. It's not 1980. In 2023, the game changed. The long march of cultural Marxism through our institutions has come to pass. The federal government is a behemoth weaponized against American citizens and conservative values, with freedom and liberty under siege as never before. The task at hand is to reverse this tide and restore our republic to its original moorings. Is too great for any one conservative policy shop to spearhead. It requires the collective action of our movement. With the quickening approach of January 2025, we have 2 years and one chance to get it right. Project 2025 is more than 50 of the nation's leading growing organizations joining forces to prepare and seize the day. The axiom goes, personnel is policy, and we need a new generation of Americans to answer the call and come to serve. This book is functionally an invitation for you, the reader, Mr. Smith, Mrs. Smith, and Miss Smith, to come to Washington or support those who can. Our goal is to assemble an army of aligned, vetted, trained, and prepared conservatives to go to work on day one to deconstruct the administrative state. The project is built on 4 pillars. Pillar 1, this volume puts in place a consensus view of how major federal agencies must be governed, and where disagreement exists, brackets out these differences for the next president to choose a path. Pillar 2, a personnel database that allows candidates to build their own professional profiles and our coalition members to review and voice their recommendations. These recommendations will then be collated and shared with the president-elect's team, greatly streamlining the appointment process. Pillar 3 is the Presidential Administration Academy, an online educational system taught by experts from our coalition. For the newcomer, this will explain how the government functions and how to function in government. For the experience, we will host in-person seminars with advanced training and set the bar for what is expected of senior leadership. In Pillar 4, the playbook, we are forming agency teams and drafting transition plans to move out upon the president's utterance of "so help me God." Let's take a break for a second. Wow. I hope you all remember what I just read by the time we get to the meat of this reading. It's deep. As Americans living at the approach of our nation's 250th birthday, we have been given much. As conservatives, we are as much required to steward this precious heritage for the next generation. On behalf of our coalition partners, we thank you and invite you to come join with us at project2025.org. Paul Dans, Director, Project 2025. Authors: Darren Baxt is Deputy Director, Center for Energy and Environment and Senior Fellow at the Competitive Enterprise Institute, the CEI. Before joining CEI, Darren was a Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation, where he played a leading role in the launch of the organization's new Energy and Environmental Center. For a decade, he led Heritage's food and agricultural policy work, and he edited and co-authored Heritage's book, Farms and Free Enterprise. He has testified numerous times before Congress, has appeared frequently in media outlets, and has played leadership roles in organizations such as the Federalist Society, American Agricultural Law Association, the Food and Drug Law Institute, and serving on the Food Drug Law Journal's Advisory Board. Jonathan Berry is Managing Partner at Boynton Gray & Associates PLLC. He served as Acting Assistant Secretary for Policy at the U.S. Department of Labor, overseeing all aspects of rulemaking and policy development at the U.S. Department of Justice. He assisted with the development of regulatory policy and with the nominations of Justice Neil Gorsuch and dozens of other judges. He previously served as Chief Counsel for Trump Transition and earlier clerk for Associate Justice Samuel Alito and Judge Jerry Smith of the U.S. Courts of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. He is a graduate of Yale College and Columbia University School of Law. Lindsay M. Burke is Director of the Center for Education Policy at the Heritage Foundation. Burke served on Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin's Transition Steering Committee and Landing Team for Education. She serves on the Board of Visitors for George Mason University, the Board of Educational Freedom Institute, and the Advisory Board of the Independent Women's Forum, Education Freedom Center. Dr. Burke's research has been published in such journals as Social Science Quarterly, Educational Research and Evaluation, and Research in Educational Administration and Leadership. She holds a BA from Hollins University, an MA from the University of Virginia, and a PhD from George Mason University. David R. Burton is Senior Fellow in Economic Policy in the Thompson A. Rowe Institute for Economic Policy Studies at the Heritage Foundation. He focuses on securities, regulations, tax policy, business law, entrepreneurship, administrative law, financial privacy, the U.S. Department of Commerce, corporate welfare, international investment, international information sharing, the U.S. economic relationship with China, and climate-related financial risk. Previously, Burton was General Counsel at the National Small Business Association, a partner in the Argus Group, Vice President, Finance, and General Counselor for New England Machinery, and Manager of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Tax Policy Center. He holds a JD from the University of Maryland School of Law and a BA in Economics from the University of Chicago. Adam Kandub is a professor of law at Michigan State University. His scholarly research focuses on telecommunication, antitrust, and internet issues. He served as Acting Assistant Secretary of Commerce and Deputy Associate Attorney General at the Justice Department during Trump administration. He received his BA magna cum laude from Yale University and his JD magna cum laude from the University of Pennsylvania Law School. Justin J. Carmack is Research Fellow for Cybersecurity, Intelligence and Engineering, Emerging Technologies in the Border Security and Immigration Center at the Heritage Foundation. Previously, he served in the intelligence community as Chief of Staff to the Director of National Intelligence, John Ratcliffe. In Congress, he served as Chief of Staff to Congressman John Ratcliffe and Congressman Ron DeSantis. Mr. McCormick studied at Truman State University in Missouri and Tel Aviv University in Israel. Brandon Carr has nearly 20 years of private sector, public sector experience in communications and tech policy. He currently serves as a senior Republican on the Federal Communications Commission. Prior to this role, Carr served as the Federal Communication Commission's general counsel. Earlier, he worked as an attorney at Wiley Rain LLP. Previously, he clerked on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit. After graduating from Georgetown University, he earned his J.D. magna cum laude from the Catholic University of America's Columbus School of Law, where he served as an editor of the Catholic University Law Review. Benjamin S. Carson, Senior, MD, is founder and chairman of the American Cornerstone Institute and previously served as the 17th Secretary to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Born in Detroit to a single mother with a third-grade education, Dr. Carson was raised to love reading and education. He attended Yale and earned his MD from the University of Michigan Medical School. For nearly 30 years, Dr. Carson served as director of pediatric neurosurgery at the Johns Hopkins Children's Center, where he performed the first separation of twins conjoined at the back of the head. He was a great, great doctor in his time. Ken Cuccinelli served as acting director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services in 2019. And then from 2019 through the end of Trump administration as acting deputy secretary for the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. During his tenure as acting deputy security, Ken also served as the chief regulatory officer for the Department of Homeland Security. He also served the Commonwealth of Virginia, first as a state senator and then as a Virginia 46th Attorney General. Rick Dearborn served as the deputy chief of staff for Donald Trump and was responsible for the day-to-day operations of 5 separate departments of the Executive Office of the President. He also served as executive director of the 2016 President-elect Donald Trump transition team. Before that, Rick served in several roles, including chief of staff in the office of then U.S. Senator Jeff Sessions for nearly 2 decades. Between his 2 tours in Senator Sessions' office, he was appointed by President George Bush as Assistant Secretary of Energy for Congressional Affairs. Earlier in his career, Rick worked for the National Republican Senatorial Committee, the Senate Republican Conference, and the Senate Steering Committee. He graduated from the University of Oklahoma with a BA in Public Administration and a minor in Economics. Wow, that's a lot of people we're going through here, huh? Veronique DeRugy is the George Gibbs Chair in Political Economy and Senior Research Fellow at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University and a nationally syndicated columnist. Her primary research interests include the U.S. economy, the federal budget, taxation, tax competition, and cronyism. DeRugy is the author of a weekly opinion column for the Creators Syndicate, writes regular columns for Reason Magazine and blogs about economists at National Review Online's The Corner. She received her MA in economics from the Paris Dauphine University and her PhD in economics from the Panthéon Sorbonne University. Donald Devine is senior scholar at the Fund for American Studies in Washington, D.C. He was President Ronald Reagan's first-term Office of Personnel Management Director, when the Washington Post labeled him Reagan's terrible swift sword of the civil service for cutting bureaucracy and reducing spending by billions of dollars. He was a professor at the University of Maryland and Bellevue University and is a columnist and author of 10 books, including his recent The Enduring Tension. Diana Fergot Roth, an Oxford-educated economist, directs the Center for Energy, Climate, and Environment at the Heritage Foundation and is adjunct professor of economics at George Washington University. Diana served as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Research and Technology at the U.S. Department of Transportation, where she directed the department's $1.2 billion research budget. the Office of Positioning, Navigation, and Timing and Spectrum Management, and the University Transportation Center program. Diana worked in senior roles in the White House under President Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, George W. Bush, where she was Chief of Staff of the Council of Economic Advisors. Thomas F. Gilman, serving as Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Administration and Chief Financial Officer of the U.S. Department of Commerce in the Trump administration. Currently, he is a Director of ACLJ Action and Chairman of Torngat Metals. Tom is the former CEO of Chrysler Financial and has had a 40-plus year career as a senior executive and entrepreneur in the global automotive industry, including roles at Chrysler Corporation, Cerberus Capital Management, Asbury Automotive Group, TD Auto Finance, and Automotive Capital Services. He holds a BS in Finance from Villanova University. Villanova University. Mandy M. Gunasekara of Oxford, Mississippi, is a principal at Section 7 Strategies, a senior policy analyst at the Independent Women's Forum, and visiting fellow in the Center for Energy, Climate, Environment at the Heritage Foundation. During the Trump administration, Mandy served as the Chief of Staff at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, as well as Principal Deputy Assistant Administrator for the Office of Air and Radiation. She previously served in numerous roles at the U.S. House of Representatives and U.S. Senate, including a Majority Counsel for the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee under Chairman Jim Einhoff. She received her BA from Mississippi College and her JD from the University of Mississippi School of Law. Jean Hamilton is Vice President and General Counsel of America's First Legal Foundation. Jean served as counselor to the Attorney General at the U.S. Department of Justice, Senior Counselor to the Secretary of Homeland Security, General Counsel on the Senate Committee on the Judiciary, Assistant Chief Counsel at U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and as an attorney advisor in the Secretary's Honors Program for attorneys at the Department of Homeland Security. Jean graduated from the Washington and Lee University School of Law, magna cum laude in order of the Coif, and has a BA in the International Affairs of the University of Georgia. Jennifer Hazelton has worked as Senior Strategic Consultant for the Department of Defense and Industrial Base Policy and has held senior positions at USAID, the Export-Import Bank of the United States, and the State Department. She was also a Communications Director in the U.S. Congress and worked as an award-winning journalist for CNN and Fox News Channel. Hazelton holds a MA in Business Administration from Emory University and earned her BA from the University of Georgia. People, I'm only at the K's. Karen Kerrigan is President and CEO of the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Council and has helped to strengthen U.S. entrepreneurship and global business growth for 28 years. She has provided counsel across the globe via training missions focused on entrepreneurial development, effective advocacy, policy information, and implementation. Karen testifies regularly before Congress and has served on numerous federal advisory boards representing the interests of entrepreneurs and small business. Dennis Dean Kirk is Associate Director for Personnel Policy with the 2025 Presidential Transition Project at the Heritage Foundation. Born and raised in Kansas, he graduated with honors from Northern Arizona University and Washburn University Law School. Dennis has over 45 years of experience in private law and public federal government and counsel services. He served in President George Bush's administration in the U.S. Army's Office of General Counsel and later as Associate General Counsel for Strategic Integration and Business Transformation, where he was recognized with the Exceptional Civilian Emeritus Civilian Service Awards and other awards. During the Trump administration, Dennis served in a senior position at the Office of Personnel Management and was nominated by President Trump to be chairman of the Merit Systems Protection Board. Kent Lastman is President and CEO of the Competitive Enterprise Institute, educated at the Catholic University of America in North Carolina, State University. He has written telecommunications, privacy, environmental, antitrust, and consumer protection regulation, as well as trade policy. The design of regulatory systems. Kent's policy, research, and advocacy have taken him to 45 state capitals, more than a dozen countries, and deep into the heart of federal regulatory state. I had to figure out. Okay. Bernard L. McNamee is an energy and regulatory attorney with a major law firm and was formerly a member of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. He is also the Distinguished Visiting Professor of Law at the Appalachian School of Law. In addition to serving as a Federal Energy Regulatory Commissioner, McNamee has served in various senior policy and legal positions throughout his career, including at the U.S. Department of Energy for U.S. Senator Ted Cruz and for Virginia Governor George Allen. McNamee also served 4 attorney generals in 2 states, Virginia and Texas. Christopher Miller served in several positions during the Trump administration, including as acting U.S. Secretary of Defense, Director of National Counterterrorism Center, Deputy Assistant Director, Secretary for Defense for Special Operations and Combating Terrorism, and Senior Director for Counterterrorism and Transnational Threats as the National Security Council. Before his civilian service in the Department of Defense, Miller was an Army Green Beret in the 5th Special Forces Group with multiple combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, achieving the rank of colonel. Miller earned a BA from George Washington University and an MA from the National War College. He also graduated from the College of Naval Command and Staff and Army War College. Stephen Moore is a conservative economist and author. He is currently a senior economist at FreedomWorks, a distinguished fellow at the Heritage Foundation, and a Fox News analyst. From 2005 to 2014, Moore served as a senior economics writer for the Wall Street Journal, the editorial page, and as a member of the journal's editorial board. He still contributes regularly to the journal's editorial page. He is a frequent lecturer to business investment and university audiences around the world on the U.S. economic and political outlook in Washington, D.C. Maureen Namdar is an attorney and senior fellow at the American Foreign Policy Council. She speaks fluent Farsi and is an expert in U.S. national security, human rights, global communications, the Middle East, and international law. Mora served as senior advisor for critical issues at the U.S. State Department and was appointed by President Donald Trump to perform duties of the Assistant Secretary of State for Consular Affairs. She also served as Vice President of Legal Compliance and Risk at the U.S. Agency for Global Media. Peter Navarro holds a PhD in economics from Harvard and was one of only 3 senior White House officials to serve with Donald Trump from the 2016 campaign to the end of the president's first term. He was the West Wing's chief China hawk and trade czar and served as director of the Office of Trade and Manufacturing Policy and Defense Production Act Policy Coordinator. His books include The Coming China Wars, Death by China, Crouching Tiger, and his White House memoirs in Trump's time, and Taking Back Trump's America. His top-rated Taking Back Trump's America podcast appears on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. If that ain't a... wow. William Perry Pendley was born in Cheyenne, Wyoming. He earned a BA and an MA from George Washington University, was a U.S. Marine Corps captain, and earned his JD from the University of Wyoming College of Law. He was an attorney on Capitol Hill, a senior official for President Ronald Reagan, and leader of the Bureau of Land Management for President Donald Trump. For 30 years, he was president of Mountain States Legal Foundation, where he argued and won cases before the Supreme Court of the United States. He authored 5 books, including Sagebrush Rebel, Reagan's Battle with Environmental Extremists, and Why It Matters Today. Max Primorak is director of the Douglas and Sarah Allison Center of Foreign Policy Studies at the Heritage Foundation. He was acting chief operating officer and assistant to the administrator, Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance at the U.S. Agency for International Development. Previously, he was deputy director of Iraq's reconstruction program at the U.S. Department of State and senior advisor in the Office of the Secretary. Max was educated at Franklin and Marshall College and the University of Chicago. Roger Saravino is Vice President of Domestic Policy at the Heritage Foundation. As Director of the Office for Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services from 2017 to 2021, he led a team of more than 250 staff enforcing civil rights, conscience, and health information privacy laws. Roger subsequently founded the HHS Accountability Project at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. He holds a JD from Harvard Law School, an MA from Public Policy from Carnegie Mellon University, and a BA from the University of Southern California. Kyron Skinner is President and CEO of the Foundation for America and the World. Taub, President of International Relations and Politics at Pepperdine University School of Public Policy. W. Glenn Campbell, Research Fellow at the Hoover Institution and a Visiting Fellow and Senior Advisor at the Heritage Foundation. Skinner served as Director of Policy Planning, Senior Advisor at the U.S. Department of State from 2018 to 2019, and was a member of the Defense Business Board at the U.S. Department of Defense in 2020. Skinner holds an MA and a PhD in Political Science from Harvard University and undergraduate degrees from Spelman College and Sacramento City College. Brooks D. Tucker served as the United States Veterans Affairs as Assistant Secretary for Congressional and Legislative Affairs from 2017 to 2021, as Acting Chief of Staff from 2020 to 2021. He helped to create the policy framework for President-elect Trump's transition team and served as a Senior Policy Advisor for National Security and Veterans Affairs to Senator Richard Burr from 2010 to 2015. A retired Marine Lieutenant Colonel, Brooks served in Afghanistan, Iraq, North Africa, the Caucasus, and the Western Pacific. He is a graduate of the University of Maryland, Marine Corps Infantry Officer Course, and Marine Corps Command and Staff College, and holds a certificate in legislative studies from Georgetown University. Hans von Spakovsky is a Senior Legal Fellow and Manager at the Election Law Reform Initiative in the Eden Meese Center 3 Center for Legal and Judicial Studies at the Heritage Foundation. He is a former member of President Donald Trump's Advisory Commission on Election Integrity from 2006 to 2007. Von Spakovsky was a commissioner at the Federal Election Commission. He served as career counsel to the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Justice from 2002 to 2005. Russ Vought is founder and president of the Center for Renewing America, a longtime conservative leader on Capitol Hill. Russ served in President Trump's cabinet as director of the Office of Management and Budget, where he oversaw the implementation of the presidential budget on key policies on deregulation and a landmark effort to eliminate critical race theory and other radical ideologies in executive agencies. Prior to his White House service, Russ spent nearly 2 decades in the broader conservative movement on Capitol Hill, including as policy director for the House Republican Conference, executive director of the Republican Study Committee, and a legislative assistant to former U.S. Senator Phil Gramm. Russ graduated with a BA from Wheaton College and received a JD from George Washington University Law School. William L. Walton, chairman for the Resolute Protector Foundation and host of the Bill Walton Show. In 2016 and 2017, Mr. Walton served in President-elect Donald Trump's transition team as agency action leader for all of the federal economic agencies. He served as chairman of the board and CEO of Allied Capital Corporation, a $6 billion NYSE traded private investment firm from 1997 to 2010. He is the immediate past president of the Council for National Policy. His extensive board service includes the Heritage Foundation, American Conservative Union, American Enterprise Institute, U.S. Chamber of Commerce, National Venture Capital Association, and Financial Services Roundtable. Paul Winfrey is Distinguished Fellow in... That scared me. Sorry. Okay, let's try this again. Sorry about that. Paul Winfrey is Distinguished Fellow in Economic Policy and Public Leadership at the Heritage Foundation. Before rejoining Heritage in 2018, Paul was Deputy Assistant to the President, Deputy Director of the Domestic Policy Council, and Director of Budget Policy at the White House. During the 2016 presidential transition, he led the team responsible for the Office of Management and Budget. He also served as a senior staff member for the U.S. Senate Committee on the Budget. Paul served in both the Biden and Trump administrations for 3 terms as the chair of the Fulbright Foreign Scholarship Board that oversees the Fulbright program and educational exchanges sponsored by the Department of State. Okay, so that there, my friends, was the list of names of people and their bios of who they are. These are the authors of this here book that we are reading. It's quite the quite the who's who from the Heritage Foundation, it looks like. But of course, we all knew that this would be the case. Now, let's move on to our editors, shall we? Oh. Like I said, guys, this is just me, raw, unedited, mad as hell. I am mad. I'm mad as hell. And I'm tired of people like just saying, well, I heard this, I heard that. You're going to hear it. You're going to hear it. Whether, you know, well, I guess whether you like it or not, you don't have to hear it. You don't have to watch my videos. You don't have to listen to me read this Project 2025. And you don't have to come back at the end of all of this and have discussions with us about what this is meaning to us on a personal level. You and me, you know. But I'm mad. And I'll be damned if I sit back and be quiet anymore. That's the problem with people that don't believe with what Trump is pushing. You know, we've been quiet, afraid to say anything, afraid to put our, you know what? I don't have any little kids in my house. I don't have nothing like that going on. So bring it, baby. Let's get this. Let's open up and share what this ass is going to do to our country. And this book, you know, this is just a start, man. I'm on a roll. We're going to do this. We will do this. Moving on. Editors. Paul Dance is director of the 2025 Presidential Transition Project at the Heritage Foundation, organizing policy and personnel recommendations and training for appointees in the next presidential administration. Before joining Heritage, he served in the Trump administration as chief of staff at the U.S. Office of Personnel Management, as OPM's White House liaison, and as a senior advisor at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Paul has extensive experience in high-stakes commercial litigation and worked for several large international law firms in New York City from 1997 to 2012 before founding his own law firm. He is a graduate of the University of Virginia Law School and received his graduate and undergraduate degrees from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Stephen Groves is the Margaret Thatcher Fellow in the Margaret Thatcher Center of Freedom at the Heritage Foundation. Groves served in the Trump administration first as Ambassador Nikki Haley's chief of staff at the U.S. mission to the United Nations. He later joined the White House as Assistant Special Counsel, representing the White House in the Mueller investigation. Groves also served as White House Deputy Press Secretary. His prior positions include Senior Counsel before the U.S. Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations and Associate at Boies, Schiller and Flexner, LLP. Groves holds an LLM from Georgetown University Law Center and a JD from Ohio Northern University's College of Law and a BA from Florida State University. Now comes a seven-page list of everyone who contributed to this and where they work. It says on page 25, contributors. The contributors listed below generously volunteered time, effort to assist the authors in the development and writing of this volume 30 chapters. The policy views and reform proposals herein are not all-inclusive catalog of conservative ideas for the next president, nor is there unanimity among the contributors or the organizations with which they are affiliated regard to their recommendations. Excuse me. Mark Albright, Chris Anderson, Office of Senator Steve Daines, Jeff Anderson, American Main Street Initiative, Michael Anton, Hillsdale College, E.J. Antoni, Heritage Foundation, Andrew Arthur, Center for Immigration Studies, Paul Atkins, Potomac Global Partners, Julia Axelrod, Center for Immigration Studies, James Bacon, James Bayer, Stuart Baker, Steptoe and Johnson LLP, Eric Baptist, Alliance Defending Freedom, Brent Bennett, Texas Public Policy Foundation, John Berlau, Competitive Enterprise Institute, Russell Berman, Hoover Institution, Sanjay Baghat, University of Colorado Boulder, Stephen Billy, Susan B. Anthony, Pro-Life America, Brad Bishop, American Cornerstone Institute, Willis Bixby, WWBX LLC, Josh Blackman, South Texas College of Law, Jim Blue, Defense of Freedom Institute for Policy Studies, Robert Bortons, Classical Conversations, Rachel Bovard, Conservative Partnership Institute, Robert Bowes, Matt Bowman, Alliance Defending Freedom, Stephen G. Bradbury, the Heritage Foundation, Preston Brashers, the Heritage Foundation, Jonathan Brotinsky, Athos, Kyle Brosnan, the Heritage Foundation, Patrick T. Brown, Ethics and Public Policy Center, Robert Burkett, ACLJ Action, Michael Burley, an American Cornerstone Institute, David R. Burton, the Heritage Foundation, Jonathan Butcher, the Heritage Foundation, Mark Busby, Busby Maritime Associates, LLC, Margaret Byfield, American Stewards of Liberty, David Beard, Corn Ferry, Anthony Campau, Center for Renewing America, James J. Carafano, the Heritage Foundation, Frank Carroll, Professional Forest Management, Orrin Cass, American Compass, Brian C. J. Kavanaugh, American Global Studies, Spencer Creation, the Heritage Foundation, Claire Christensen, American Cornerstone Institute, Victoria Coates, Heritage Foundation, Ellie Cohnheim, Independent Women's Forum, Ezra Cohen, Elbridge Colby, Marathon Initiative, Earl Comstock, White and Case LLP, Lisa Correnti, Center for Family and Human Rights, Monica Crowley, the Nixon Seminar, Laura Cunliffe, Independent Women's Forum, Tom Daines, Amber Wave Partners, Sohan Dasgupta, Taft's Dead Ninus and Hollister LLP, Sergio De La Pena, Chris De Browder, National Center for Urban Operations, Corey DeAngelis, American Federation for Children, Caroline DeBerry, Paragon Health Institute, Ariel Del Turco, Family Research Council, Irv Dennis, American Cornerstone Institute, Dave Deptula, Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies, Donald Devine, the Fund for American Studies, Chuck DeVore, Texas Public Policy Foundation, C. Wallace DeWitt, Allen and Overy LLP, James DePayne, the Heritage Foundation, Matthew Dickerson, the Heritage Foundation, Michael Dean, American Legal First Foundation, David Ditch, the Heritage Foundation, Ethics and Public Policy Center, Dave Dory, the Fairness Center, Max Eden, American Enterprise Institute, Troy Edgar, IBM Consulting, Joseph Edlow, Heritage Foundation, Jen Ellinger, Booz Allen Hamilton, John Earhart, Office of Senator Josh Hawley, Kristen Imaker, Heritage Foundation, Robert S. Eitel, Defense of Freedom Institute for Policies, Will Estrada, Parents' Rights Foundation, John Fear, Center for Immigration Studies, Bauer Feigenbaum, Reason Foundation. Travis Fisher, Heritage Foundation. George Fishman, Center for Immigration Studies. Leslie Ford, Heritage Foundation. Aaron Friedman, Federal Policy Group. Bruce Frohnin, Ohio Northern University College of Law. Joel Frushone, Ernst & Young. Finch Fulton, Diana Forgot Roth, the Heritage Foundation. Kaylee Gable, American Cornerstone Institute. Christopher Graykick, Family Research Council. Alexandria Gazer, River Financial Inc. Mario Garza, Patty Jane Geller, the Heritage Foundation. Andrew Gillen, Texas Public Policy Foundation. James Gilmore III, Gilmore Global Group LLC. Vance Ginn, Economic Consultant LLC. Alma Golden, the Institute for Women's Health. Mike Gonzalez, Heritage Foundation. Chadwick R. Gore, Defense Forum Foundation. David Gottler, Ethics and Public Policy Center. Brian Gottstein, Heritage Foundation. Competitive Enterprise Institute. David Greenberg. Rob Greenway, Hudson Institute. Rachel Gressler, Heritage Foundation. DJ Gribben, Madras Consulting. Garrison Grisdale, American Cornerstone Institute. Joseph Grogan, USC Schaefer School for Health Policy and Economics. Andrew Guernsey. Jeffrey Gunter, Republican Jewish Coalition. Joe Guy, Club for Growth. Joseph Guzman, Amelia Halikas, Heritage Foundation. Gene Hamilton, American First Legal Foundation. Richard Hananaya, Center for the Study of Partisanship and Ideology. Center for the Study of Partisanship and Ideology. Put a pin on that. Simon Hankinson, Heritage Foundation. David Harlow, Derek Harvey, Office of Congressman David Nunes. Jason Hayes, McKinnick Center for Public Policy. Jennifer Hazelton, Lou Heinzer, Eddie Heipel, Troop Hemingway, Personal Policy Operations. Nathan Hitchen, Equal Rights Institute. Pete Hoekstra, Gabriella Hoffman, Independent Women's Forum. Tom Hoffman, the Heritage Foundation. Chris Horner, Mike Howell, the Heritage Foundation. Valerie Huber, the Institute for Women's Health. Andrew Hughes, the American Cornerstone Institute. Joseph Humar, Center for a Secure Free Society. Christopher Iacovella, American Securities Association. Melanie Israel, the Heritage Foundation. Kevin Ivory, Utah House of Representatives. Roman Jakowski, the Heritage Foundation. Abby Jones. Emily Cow, Alliance Defending Freedom. Jared M. Kelson, Boyden Gray and Associates. Aaron Kierdy, Ethics and Public Policy Center. Allie Kilmartin, Alliance Defending Freedom. Julie Kirshner, Federation for American Immigration Reform. Dan Kish, Institute for Energy Research. Kenneth A. Klukowski. Adam Korzinski, American Principles Project. Kathy Newble-Kovrek, Sagita Solutions LLC. Bethany Cosma, Keystone Policy. Matthew Cosma. Julius Crean, American Affairs. Stanley Kurtz, Ethics and Public Policy Center. David LeCarte, Baker Botts LLP. Paul J. Larkin, Center, the Heritage Foundation. Kent Lastman, Competitive Enterprise Institute. James R. Lawrence III, Envisage Law. Paul Lawrence Consulting. Nathan Lemur, Targeted Victory. David Ligotti, University of Delaware. Mario Lewis, Competitive Enterprise Institute. Ben Lieberman, Competitive Enterprise Institute. John Ligon, Evelyn Leem, American Cornerstone Institute. Mario Loyola, Competitive Enterprise Institute. John M. G. Malcolm, Heritage Foundation. Joseph Masterman, Cooper and Kirk P. LLC, Earl Matthews, Vandenberg Coalition, Dan Mauler, Heritage Action for America, Drew McCall, American Cornerstone Institution, Trent McCotter, Boyd and Gray and Associates, Micah Meadowcroft, American Conservative, Edwin Meese III, Heritage Foundation, Jessica Mulligan, Competitive Enterprise Institute, Frank Mermaud, Ophius International, Mark Miller, Office Governor Kristi Noem, Cleta Mitchell, Conservative Partnership Institute. Hold on, I need to hydrate. Okay. Kevin E. Moley, Caitlin Moon, American Center for Law and Justice, David Moore, Brigham Young University Law School, Claire Morrell, Ethics and Public Policy Center, Mark Morgan, Heritage Foundation, Hunter Morgan, American Cornerstone Institute, Rachel Morrison, Ethics and Public Policy Center, Jonathan Moy, Heritage Foundation, Ian Murray, Competitive Enterprise Institute, Ryan Nabel, National Taxpayers Union, Michael Massey, Jackson Walker, LLP, Lucian Niemeyer Group, Nick and Hutter Wiley Rain, LLP, Mylan Mitch, Nicolich, Matt O'Brien, Immigration Reform Law Institute, Caleb Orr, Boyd Gray Associates, Michael Pack, Lee Pedersen, Michael Pillsbury, Heritage Foundation, Patrick Pizzella, Leadership Institute, Robert Poole, Reason Foundation, Kevin Preskinis, Alimar Health Solutions, Pam Pryor, National Committee for Religious Freedom, Thomas Pyle, Institute for Energy Research, John Ratcliffe, American Global Strategies, Paul Ray, Heritage Foundation, Joseph Redden, Flexless Forestry LLC, J.W. Richards, Heritage Foundation, Jordan Richardson, Hayes Suarez, Melville, PA, Jason Richwine, Center for Immigration Studies, Sean Riley, American Conservative, Lori Rise, the Heritage Foundation, Leo Rios, Mark Robeck, Energy Evolution Consulting, LLC, James Rokas, ACLJ Action, Mark Royce, Nova Annandale College, Reed Rubenstein, Americans First Legal Foundation, William Ruger, American Institute for Economic Research, Austin Roos, Center for Family and Human Rights, Brent D. Sadler, Heritage Foundation, Alexander William Salter, Texas Tech University, John Sanders, John Locke Foundation, Carla Sands, American First Policy Institute, Robbie Stephendry Sanders, Coalition for a Prosperous America, David Schwab, Brett D. Schaefer, Heritage Foundation, Nina Aucharinko Schaefer, Heritage Foundation, Matt Schuck, American Cornerstone Institute, Justin Schwab, CGCN Law, John Schwepp, American Principles Project, Mark Schreiner, Reason Foundation, Derek Selnick Consulting, Josh Sewell, Taxpayers for Common Sense, Kathleen Sagma, Western Energy Alliance, Matt Sharp, Alliance Defending Freedom, Judy Shelton, Independent Institute, Nathan Symington, Lauren Smith, Skyline Policy Risk Group, Zach Smith, Heritage Foundation, Jack Spencer, Heritage Foundation, Adrian Spiro, U.S. Committee on Homeland Security, Thomas Bower, the Heritage Foundation, Peter St. Ong, the Heritage Foundation, Chris Stanley, Functional Government Initiative, Paula Stannard, Parker Stathos, Texas Public Policy Foundation. Woo, people, oh my gosh, we're going to have fun digging into this. We have till January 20th to get all this settled, figured out, figured out who these people are, what these places are that are pushing all this agenda. And keeping an eye on who he's placing in office. Because it's going to get deep quick. William Steger, independent consultant. Kenny Stein, Institute for Energy Research. Corey Stewart, PLLC. Mary Stoll, Catherine T. Sullivan, 1792 Exchange. Brett Swearington, Miller Johnson. Michael Sweeney, Robert Swope, Aaron Sasbo, CGCN Group. Katie Talento, All Better Health. Tony Tata Leadership Group, LLC. Farkas Thompson, Todd Thurman, American Cornerstone Institute. Brett Tolman Group. Kayla M. Tonneson, Recovery for America, New Foundation. Joe Trotter, American Legislative Exchange Council. TV Troy, Mercantis Center. Clayton Tufts, Aaron Valdez, Texas Public Policy Foundation. Mark Vandroff, Jessica M. Vaughn, Center for Immigration Studies. John J.V. Venable, Heritage Foundation. Morgan Lorraine Vinia, Lewis Institute for National Security of America. Andrew N. Vollmer, Mercatus Center. Hans A. von Spakovsky, Heritage Foundation. Greg Walcher, Natural Resources Group, LLC. David M. Walsh, Dakota Group. Aaron Walsh, the Heritage Foundation. Jacqueline Ward, American Cornerstone Institute. Emma Waters, Heritage Foundation. Michael Williams, American Cornerstone Institute. Aaron Wolf, Jonathan Wolfson, Alexi Woltnorst, Athos. Frank Wuku, Zar Yabara, Freedom Works. John Zardinsky, American First Legal Foundation. And Laura Zork, Freedom Works. I don't know about you, but I see a lot of repetitiveness in the people, places, and a lot of words used to draw you in to make you think that everything is okay, you know, America First, Freedom Project, all of that, you know. I think that all of that stuff is just put in there to give the patriots a feeling of calm, because, you know, what could be bad with something called Patriot Act, or, you know, something like that? I mean, it can't be that bad, you know. And, you know, there's loopholes, right? Trump can't do nothing. He can't change anything. We have the Constitution. We have courts. We have things to stop it, right? We did. We did. And then he came along. Sorry. Okay, we are now at page 33 of 920. Forward. A Promise to America. Kevin D. Roberts, PhD. 44 years ago, the United States and the conservative movement were in dire straits. Both had been betrayed by the Washington establishment and were uncertain whom to trust. Both were internally splintered and strategically adrift. Worse still, at that moment of acute vulnerability and division, we found ourselves besieged by existential adversaries, foreign and domestic. The late 1970s were by any measure a historic low point for America and the political coalition dedicated to preserving its unique legacy of human flourishing and freedom. Today, America and the conservative movement are enduring an era of division and danger akin to the late 1970s. Now, as then, our political class has been discredited by wholesale dishonesty and corruption. Look at America under the ruling and cultural elite today. Inflation is ravaging family budgets. Drug overdose deaths continue to escalate, and children suffer the toxic normalization of transgenderism, with drag queens and pornography invading their school libraries. Overseas, a totalitarian communist dictatorship in Beijing is engaged in a strategic, cultural, and economic Cold War against America's interests, values, and people, all while globalist elites in Washington awaken only slowly to that growing threat. Moreover, low-income communities are drowning in addiction and government dependence. Contemporary elites have even repurposed the worst ingredients of 1970s radical chic to build the totalitarian cult known today as the Great Awakening. And now, as then, the Republican Party seems to have little understanding about what to do. Most alarming of all, the very moral foundations of our society are in peril. Yet students of history will note that notwithstanding all those challenges, the late 1970s proved to be the moment when the political right unified itself and the country and led the United States to historic political, economic, and global victories. The Heritage Foundation is proud to have played a small but pivotal role in that story. It was in early 1979, amid stagflation, gas lines, and the Red Army's invasion of Afghanistan, the nadir of Jimmy Carter's days of malaise, that Heritage launched the Mandate for Leadership project. We brought together hundreds of conservative scholars and academics across the conservative movement. Together, this team created a 20-volume, 3,000-page governing handbook containing more than 2,000 conservative policies to reform the federal government and rescue the American people from Washington dysfunction. It was a promise from the conservative movement to the country, confident, specific, and clear. Mandate for Leadership was published in January 1981, the same month Ronald Reagan was sworn into his presidency. By the end of that year, more than 60% of its recommendations had become policy, and Reagan was on his way to ending stagflation, reviving American confidence and prosperity, and winning the Cold War. The bad news today is that our political establishment and cultural elite have once again driven America towards decline. The good news is that we know that conservatives should be confident that we can rescue our kids, reclaim our culture, revive our economy, and defeat the anti-American left at home and abroad. We did it before, and we will do it again. As Ronald Reagan put it, freedom is a fragile thing, and it's never more than one generation away from extinction. It's not ours by way of inheritance. It must be fought for and defended constantly by each generation. This is the duty history has put before us and the standard by which our generation of conservatives will be judged, and we should not want it any other way. The legacy of Mandate for Leadership and indeed the entire Reagan Revolution is that if conservatives want to save the country, we need a bold and courageous plan. This book is the first step in that plan. The Conservative Promise. This volume, The Conservative Promise, is the opening salvo of the 2025 Presidential Transition Project, launched by the Heritage Foundation and our many partners in April 2022. Its 30 chapters lay out hundreds of clear and concrete policy recommendations for White House offices, cabinet departments, Congress and agencies, commissions, and boards. Put a pin in that. Just as important as the scope of the Conservative Promise's recommendations is the breadth of his authorship. This book is the product of more than 400 scholars and policy experts from across conservative movement and around the country. Contributors include former elected officials, world-renowned economists, and veterans from 4 presidential administrations. This is an agenda prepared by and for conservatives who will be ready on day one of the next administration to save our country from the brink of disaster. The Heritage Foundation is once again facilitating this work, but as our dozens of partners and hundreds of authors will attest, this book is the work of the entire conservative movement. As such, the authors express consensus recommendations already forged, especially along 4 broad fronts that will decide America's future. 1. Restore the family as the centerpiece of American life and protect our children. 2. Dismantle the administrative state and return self-governance to the American people. 3. Defend our nation's sovereignty, borders, and bounty against global threats. 4. Secure our God-given individual rights to live freely, what our constitutions call the blessings of liberty. What makes these 4 pieces of the Conservative Promise so valuable to the next president is that they cut through superficial distractions and focus on the moral and foundational challenges America faces in the moment of history. This was one of the secrets of conservative success in the Reagan era, one of our generations should emulate. As in the late 1970s, Americans today experience the failures of political and cultural elites in countless ways. In the job market and in the grocery store checkout lines, on the streets and in our schools, in the media and within our institutions. But in truth, these daily dysfunctions are not innumerable problems, but innumerable manifestations of a few core crises. In 1979, the threats we faced were the Soviet Union, the socialism of 1970s liberals, and the predatory deviancy of cultural elites. Reagan defeated these beasts by ignoring their tentacles and striking instead at their hearts. His approach to the Cold War, we win and they lose. His economic agenda, the human dignity of work and its many rewards. His platform in the culture wars, the community of values embodied in these words: family, work, neighborhood, peace, and freedom. This book and Project 2025 as a whole will arm the next conservative president with the same kind of strategic clarity, but for a new age. Promise 1. Restore the family as the centerpiece of American life and protect our children. The next conservative president must get to work pursuing the true priority of politics, the well-being of the American family. In many ways, the entire point of centralizing political power is to subvert the family. Its purpose is to replace people's natural loves and loyalties with unnatural ones. You see this in the popular left-wing aphorism: government is simply the name we give to the things we choose to do together. But in real life, most of the things people do together have nothing to do with the government. These are the mandating institutions that serve as the building blocks of any healthy society: marriage, family, work, church, school, volunteering. The name real people give to the things we do together in community, not government. Our lives are full of interwoven, overlapping communities, and our individual and collective happiness depends upon them. But the most important community in each of our lives and the life of the nation is the family. Today, the American family is in crisis. 40% of all children are born to unmarried mothers, including more than 70% of Black children. There is no government program that can replace the hole in a child's soul cut out by the absence of a father. Fatherlessness is one of the principal sources of American poverty, crime, mental illness, teen suicide, substance abuse, rejection of the church, and high school dropouts. So many of the problems government programs are designed to solve but can't are ultimately problems created by the crisis of marriage and the family. The world has never seen a thriving, healthy, free, and prosperous society where most children grow up without their married parents. If current trends continue, we are heading towards social implosion. Furthermore, the next conservative president must understand that using government alone to respond to symptoms of the family crisis is a dead end. Federal power must instead be wielded to reverse the crisis and rescue America's kids from familia breakdown. The conservative promise includes dozens of specific policies to accomplish this existential task. Some are obvious and long-standing goals, like eliminating marriage penalties and welfare programs and tax code and installing work requirements for food stamps. But we must go further. It's time for policymakers to elevate family authority, information, and cohesion as their top priority, and even use government power, including through the tax code, to restore the American family. Today, the left is threatening the tax-exempt status of churches and charities that reject woke progressivism. They will soon turn to Christian schools and clubs with this same totalitarian intent. The next conservative president must make the institutions of America, civil society, work hard targets for woke culture warriors. This starts with deleting the terms sexual orientation and gender identity, diversity, equity, and inclusion, gender equality, gender equity, gender awareness, gender sensitive, abortion, reproductive health, reproductive rights, and any other term used to deprive Americans of their First Amendment rights out of every federal rule, agency, regulation, contract, grant, regulation, and piece of legislation that exists. Pornography manifested today in the omnipresent propagation of transgender ideology and sexualization of children, for instance, is not a political Gordian knot inextricably binding up desperate claims about free speech, property rights, sexual liberation, and child welfare. It has no claim to First Amendment protection. Its purveyors are child predators and misogynistic exploiters of women. Their product is as addictive as any illicit drug and as psychologically destructive as any crime. Pornography should be outlawed. The people who produce and distribute it should be imprisoned. Educators and public librarians who purvey it should be classed as registered sex offenders. And telecommunications and technology firms that facilitate its spread should be shuttered. In our schools, the question of parental authority over their children's education is a simple one. Schools serve parents, not the other way around. That is, of course, the best argument for universal school choice, but a goal all conservatives and conservative presidents must pursue. But even before we achieve that long-term goal, parents' rights as their children's primary educators should be non-negotiable in American schools. States, cities, and counties, school boards, union bosses, principals, and teachers who disagree should be immediately cut off from federal funds. The noxious tenets of critical race theory and gender ideology should be excised from curricula in every public school in the country. These theories poison our children who are being taught on the one hand to affirm that the color of their skin fundamentally determines their identity and even their moral status, while on the other they are taught to deny the very creatureliness that inheres in being human and consists in accepting the giveness of our nature as men or women. Allowing parents or physicians to reassign the sex of a minor child is abuse and must end. For public institutions to use taxpayer dollars to declare the superiority or inferiority of certain races, sexes, religions is a violation under Constitution and civil rights laws and cannot be tolerated by any government anywhere in the country. But the pro-family promise expressed in this book and central to the next conservative president's agenda must go much further than the traditional narrow definition of family issues. Every threat to family stability must be confronted. This resolve should color each of our policies. Consider our approach to big tech. The worst of these companies prey on children, like drug dealers, to get them addicted to their mobile apps. Many Silicon Valley executives famously don't let their own kids have smartphones. They nevertheless make billions of dollars addicting other people's children to theirs. TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and other social media platforms are specifically designed to create the digital dependencies that fuel mental illness and anxiety to fray children's bonds with their parents and siblings. Federal policy cannot allow this industrial-scale child abuse to continue. Finally, conservatives should gratefully celebrate the greatest pro-family win in a generation, overturning Roe v. Wade, a decision that for 5 decades made a mockery of our Constitution and facilitated the deaths of tens of millions of unborn children. But the Dobbs decision is just the beginning. Conservatives in the states and in Washington, including in the next conservative administration, should push as hard as possible to protect the unborn in every jurisdiction in America. In particular, the next conservative president should work with Congress to enact the most robust protections for the unborn that Congress will support while deploying existing federal powers to protect innocent life and vigorously complying with the statutory bans on the federal funding of abortion. Conservatives should ardently pursue these pro-life and pro-family policies while recognizing the many women who find themselves in immensely difficult and often tragic situations and the heroism of every choice to become a mother. Alternative options to abortion, especially adoption, should receive federal and state support. In summary, the next president has a moral responsibility to lead the nation in restoring a culture of life in America again. Gee. Okay. Moving on. I'll keep my thoughts to myself for a little while here. Promise number 2, dismantle the administrative state and return self-governance to the American people. Of course, the surest way to put the federal government back to work for the American people is to reduce its size and scope back to something resembling the original constitutional intent. Conservatives desire a smaller government, not for its own sake, but for the sake of human flourishing. But the Washington establishment doesn't want a constitutionally limited government because it means they lose power and are held more accountable by the people who put them in power. Like restoring popular sovereignty, the task of reattaching the federal government's constitutional and democratic tethers calls to mind Ronald Reagan's observation that there are no easy answers, but there are simple answers. In the case of making the federal government smaller, more effective, and accountable, the simple answer is the Constitution itself. The surest proof of this is how strenuously and creatively generations of progressives and many Republican insiders have worked to cut themselves free from the strictures of the 1789 Constitution and subsequent amendments. Consider the federal budget. Under current law, Congress is required to pass a budget, and 12 issued specific spending bills comporting with it every single year. The last time Congress did so was in 1996. Congress no longer meaningfully budgets, authorizes, or categorizes spending. Instead, party leaders negotiate one multi-trillion-dollar spending bill, several thousand pages long, and then vote on it before anyone literally has had a chance to read it. Debate time is restricted, amendments are prohibited, and all of this is backed up against a midnight deadline when the previous omnibus spending bill will run out and the federal government shuts down. This process is not designed to empower 330 American citizens and their elected representatives, but rather to empower the party elites secretly negotiating without any public scrutiny over oversight. In the end, congressional leaders' behavior and incentives here are no different from those of global elites insulating policy decisions over the climate, trade, public health, you name it, from the sovereignty of national electorates. Public scrutiny and democratic accountability make life harder for policymakers, so they skirt it. It's not dysfunction, it's corruption. And despite its gaudy price tag, the federal budget is not even close to the worst example of this corruption. That distinction belongs to the administrative state, the dismantling of which is a top priority for the next conservative president. The term administrative state refers to the policy-making work done by the bureaucracies of all of the federal government's departments, agencies, and millions of employees. Under Article 1 of the Constitution, all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and a House of Representatives. That is, federal laws enacted only by elected legislators in both houses of Congress. This exclusive authority was part of the framers' doctrine of separated powers. They not only split the federal government's legislative, executive, and judicial powers into different branches, they also gave each branch checks over the others. Under our Constitution, the legislative branch, Congress, is far and away the most powerful and correspondingly the most accountable to the people. In recent decades, members of the House and Senate discovered that if they give away that power to the Article 2 branch of government, they can also deny responsibility for its actions. So today in Washington, most policies no longer set by Congress at all, but by the administrative state. Given the choice between being powerful but vulnerable or irrelevant but famous, most members of Congress have chosen the latter. Congress passes intentionally vague laws that delegate decision-making over a given issue to a federal agency. That agency's bureaucrats, not just unelected but seemingly unfireable, then leap at the chance to fill the vacuum created by Congress's preening cowardice. The federal government is growing larger and less constitutionally accountable, even to the president, every year. A combination of elected and unelected bureaucrats at the Environmental Protection Agency quietly strangles domestic energy production through difficult to understand rulemaking processes. Bureaucrats at the Department of Homeland Security, following the lead of a feckless administration,
order border and immigration enforcement agencies to help migrants criminally enter our country with impunity. Bureaucrats at the Department of Education inject racist, anti-American, ahistorical propaganda into America's classroom. Bureaucrats at the Department of Justice force school districts to undermine girls' sports and parents' rights to satisfy transgender extremists. Woke bureaucrats at the Pentagon force troops to attend training seminars about white privilege. And bureaucrats at the State Department infuse U.S. foreign aid programs with woke extremism about intersectionality and abortion. Unaccountable federal spending is the secret lifeblood of the Great Awakening. Nearly every power center held by the left is funded or supported one way or another through the bureaucracy of Congress. Colleges and school districts are funded by tax dollars. The administrative state holds 100% of its power at the sufferance of Congress, and its insulation from presidential discipline is an unconstitutional fairy tale spun by the Washington establishment to protect its turf. Members of Congress shield themselves from constitutional accountability, often when the White House allows them to get away with it. Cultural institutions like public libraries and public health agencies are only as independent from public accountability as elected officials and voters permit. Let's be clear, the most egregious regulations promulgated by the current administration come from one place, the Oval Office. The president cannot hide behind the agencies. As his many executive orders make clear, he has the responsibility for the regulations that threaten American communities, schools, and families. A conservative president must move swiftly to do away with these vast abuses of presidential power and remove the career and political bureaucrats who fuel it. Properly considered restoring fiscal limits and constitutional accountability to the federal government is a continuation of restoring national sovereignty to the American people. In foreign affairs, global strategy, federal budgeting, and policy making, the same pattern emerges again and again. Ruling elites slash and tear at restrictions and accountability placed on them. They centralize power up and away from the American people to supranational treaties and organizations, to left-wing experts, to sight unseen, all or nothing legislating, to the unelected career bureaucrats of the administrative state. As monolithic as the left's institutional power appears to be, it originates with appropriations from Congress and is made complete by a feckless president. A conservative president must look at the legislative branch for decisive action. The administrative state is not going anywhere until Congress acts to retrieve its own power from bureaucrats on the White House. But in the meantime, there are many executive tools a courageous conservative president can use to handcuff the bureaucracy, push Congress to return to its constitutional responsibility, restore power over Washington to the American people, bring the administrative state to heel, and in the process defang and defund the woke culture warriors who have infiltrated every last institution in America. The conservative promise lays out how to use many of these tools, including how to fire supposedly unfireable federal bureaucrats, how to shutter wasteful and corrupt bureaus and offices, how to muzzle woke propaganda at every level of government, how to restore the American people's constitutional authority over the administrative state, and how to save untold taxpayer dollars in the process. Finally, the president can restore public and confidence and accountability to our most important government function of all, national defense. The American people desire a military full of highly skilled servicemen and women who can protect the homeland and our interests overseas. The next conservative president must end the left's social experimentation with the military, restore warfighting as its sole mission, and set defeating the threat of the Chinese Communist Party as its highest priority. The next conservative president must possess the courage to relentlessly put the interests of the everyday American over the desires of the ruling elite. Their outrage cannot be prevented. It must simply be ignored. And it can be. The left derives its power from the institutions they control. But those institutions are only powerful to the extent that constitutional officers surrender their own legitimate authority to them. A president who refuses to do so and uses his or her office to reimpose constitutional authority over federal policymaking can begin to correct decades of corruption and remove thousands of bureaucrats from the positions of public trust they have so long abused. Promise 3. defend our nation's sovereignty, borders, and bounty against global threats. The United States belongs to we the people. All government authority derives from the consent of the people, and our nation's success derives from the character of its people. The American people's right to rule ourselves is the obverse of our duty. We cannot outsource to others our obligation to ensure the conditions that allow our families, local communities, churches, and synagogues and neighborhoods to thrive. The buck stops with each of us, so each of us must have the freedom to pursue the good for ourselves and those entrusted to our care. To most Americans, this is common sense, but in Washington, D.C. and other centers, the leftist power like the media and the academy, this statement of basic civics is branded hate speech. Progressive elites speak in lofty terms: openness, progress, expertise, cooperation, and globalization. But too often these terms are just rhetorical Trojan horses, concealing their true intention, stripping we the people of our constitutional authority over our country's future. America's corporate political elites do not believe in the ideals to which our nation is dedicated: self-governance, the rule of law, and the ordered liberty. They certainly do not trust the American people, and they disdain the Constitution's restrictions on their ambitions. Go figure. Okay, Elon. Instead, they believe in a kind of 21st century Wilsonian order in which the enlightened, highly educated managerial elite runs things rather than the humble, patriotic working families who make up the majority of what the elites contemptuously call flyover country. The Wilsonian hubris has spread like a cancer through many of America's largest corporations, its public institutions, and its popular culture. Those who run our so-called American corporations have bent to the will of the woke agenda and care more for their foreign investors and organizations than their American workers and customers. Today, nearly every top-tier U.S. university president or Wall Street hedge fund manager has more in common with a socialist European head of state than with the parents at a high school football game in Waco, Texas. Many elites' entire identity, it seems, is wrapped up in their sense of superiority over those people. But under our Constitution, they are the mere equals of the workers who shower after work instead of before. This is as it should and must be. Intellectual sophistication, advanced degrees, financial success, and all other makers of elite status have no bearing on a person's knowledge of the one thing most necessary for governance: what it means to live well. That knowledge is available to each of us, no matter how humble our backgrounds or how unpretentious our attainments. It is open to us to read in the book of human nature, to which we are all offered the key just by merit of our shared humanity. One of the great premises of American political life is that everyone who can read in that book must have a voice in deciding the course and fate of our republic. Progressive policymakers and pundits in America either fail to understand this promise or intentionally reject it. They enthusiastically support supranational organizations like the United Nations and European Nation, which are run and staffed most entirely by people who share their values and are mostly insulated from the influence of national elections. That's why they're eager for America to sign the international treaties on everything from pharmaceutical patients to climate change to the rights of the child, and why those treaties invariably endorse policies that could never pass through U.S. Congress. Like the progressive Woodrow Wilson a century ago, the woke left today seeks a world bound by global treaties they write, in which they exercise dictatorial powers over all nations without being subject to democratic accountability. That's why today's progressive left so cavalierly supports open borders despite the lawless humanitarian crisis their policy created along America's southern border. They seek to purge the very concept of the nation state from the American ethos. No matter how much crime increases or resources drop for schools and hospitals or wages decrease for working class, open borders activism is a classic example of what the German theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer called cheap grace. publicly promoting one's own virtue without risking any personal inconvenience. Indeed, the only direct impact of open borders on pro-open borders elites is that the constant flow of illegal immigration suppresses the wages of the housekeepers, landscapers, and busboys. Cheap Grace aptly describes the left's love affair with environmental extremism. Those who suffer most from the policies of environmentalism would have us enact our aged, poor, and vulnerable. It is not a political cause, but a pseudo-religion meant to baptize liberals' ruthless pursuit of absolute power in the holy water of environmental virtue. At its very heart, environmental extremism is decidedly anti-human. Stewardship and conservation are supplemented by population control and economic regression. Environmental ideologies would ban the fuels that run almost all the world's cars, planes, factories, farms, and electricity grids. Abandoning confidence in human resilience and creativity in responding to the challenges of the future would raise impediments to the most meaningful human activities. They would stand human affairs on their head, regarding human activity itself as fundamentally a threat to be sacrificed to the God of nature. The same goals are the heart of elite support for economic globalization. For 30 years, America's political, economic, and cultural leaders embraced and enriched communist China and its genocidal Communist Party while hollowing out America's industrial base. What may have started out with good intentions has now been made clear. Unfettered trade with China has been a catastrophe. It has made a handful of American corporations enormously profitable while twisting their business incentives away from American people's needs. For a generation, politicians of both parties promised that engagement with Beijing would grow our economy while injecting American values into China. The opposite has happened. American factories have closed, jobs have been outsourced, our manufacturing economy has been financialized, and all along corporations profiting failed to export our values of human rights and freedom. Rather, they imported China's anti-American values into their C-suites. Even before the rise of big tech, Wall Street ignored China's serial theft of American intellectual property. It outright cheered the elimination of American manufacturing jobs. Learn to code, they would gloat. These were just the price of progress. Engagement was at every step. Beijing's project, not America's. The Chinese Communist Party, CCP, dictated terms only to break them whenever it suited them. They stole our technology, spied on our people, and threatened our allies, all with trillions of dollars of wealth and military power financed by their access to our market. Then came the rise of big tech, which is now less a contributor to the U.S. economy than it is a tool of China's government. In exchange for cheap labor and regulatory special treatment from Beijing, America's largest technology firms funnel data about Americans to the CCP. They hand over sensitive intellectual property with military and intelligence applications to keep the money rolling in. They let Beijing censor China users on their platforms. They let the CCP set their corporate policies about mobile apps. They run interference for our rivals' political priorities in Washington. One side of big tech companies' model is old-fashioned American competitiveness and world-changing technological invention. But increasingly, that side of these businesses is overshadowed by their role as operatives in the lucrative employ of America's most dangerous international enemy. If you want to understand the danger posed by a collaboration between big tech and the CCP, look no further than TikTok, the highly addictive video app used by 80 million Americans every month and overwhelmingly popular among teenage girls, is in effect a tool of Chinese espionage. The ties between TikTok and the Chinese government are not loose, and they are not coincidental. The same can be observed for many U.S. colleges and universities through the CCP's Confucius Institutes. Beijing has been just as successful as compromising and co-opting our higher education system as they have at compromising and co-opting corporate America. A casual reader might take the last few pages as surveying a broad array of challenges facing the American people and the next conservative president. Supranational policymaking, border security, globalization, engagement with China, manufacturing, big tech, and Beijing compromised colleges. But these are really not many issues. But two, that China is a totalitarian enemy of the United States, not a strategic partner or fair competitor. And that America's elites had betrayed the American people. The solution to all of the above problems is not to tinker with this or that government program, to replace this or that bureaucrat. These are problems not of technocratic efficiency, but of national sovereignty and constitutional governance. We solve them by not trimming and reshaping the leaves, but by ripping out the tree's root and branch. International organizations and agreements that erode our Constitution, rule of law or property or sovereignty shall not be reformed. They should be abandoned. Illegal immigration should be ended, not mitigated. The border sealed, not reprioritized. Economic engagement with China should be ended, not rethought. Our manufacturing and industrial base should be restored, not allowed to deteriorate further. Confucius Institutes, TikTok, and any other arm of Chinese propaganda and espionage should be outlawed, not merely monitored. Universities taking money from the CCP should lose their accreditation, charters, and eligibility for federal funds. The next conservative president should go beyond merely defending America's energy interests, but go on offense, asserting them around the world. America's vast reserves of oil and natural gas are not an environmental problem. They are the lifeblood of economic growth. American dominance of the global energy market would be a good thing for the world and, more importantly, for we the people. It's not just about jobs, even though unleashing domestic energy production would create millions of them. It's not just about higher wages for workers who didn't go to college, though they would receive the wages they've missed out on for 2 generations. Full spectrum strategic energy dominance would facilitate the reinvigoration of America's entire industrial and manufacturing sector as we disentangle our economy from China. Globally, it would rebalance power away from dangerous regimes in Russia and Middle East. It would build powerful alliances with fast-growing nations in Africa and provide us with the leverage to counter Chinese ambitions in South America and the Pacific. Locally, it would drive billions of dollars of private investment to the communities that have been hammered by globalization since the 1990s. And it would clarify our intentions that Beijing, that the next president can ensure that a large part of America's reindustrialization is in the production of the equipment we will need to dissuade future foreign meddling with U.S. vital interests. Whew! That's a lot. Oh, this next one might not be so long. Oh, wow. And it just keeps going. All right. Let me break here for a minute. I'll be back. Okay, I just had to get some more lights on because it's getting dark, that time of year. I'm going to read until it gets through all the preamble stuff that we're reading right now, and then I will get that video uploaded, and then I will later this evening start reading into the guts of what we're dealing with. So here we go. Promise number 4, secure our God-given individual right to enjoy the blessings of liberty. The Declaration of Independence famously asserted the belief of America's founders that all men are created equal and endowed with God-given rights to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. It's the pursuit of happiness, that is central to America's heroic experiment in self-government. When the founders spoke of pursuit of happiness, what they meant might be understood today as, in essence, pursuit of blessedness. That is, an individual must be free to live as his creator ordained to flourish. Our Constitution grants each of us the liberty to do not what we want, but what we ought. This pursuit of the good life is found primarily in family, marriage, children, Thanksgiving dinners, and the like. Many find happiness through their work. Think of dedicated teachers or healthcare professionals, entrepreneurs or plumbers throwing themselves into their businesses. Anyone who sees a job well done as a personal reward. Religious devotion and spirituality are the greatest sources of happiness around the world. Still, others find themselves happiest in their local voluntary communities of friends, their neighbors, their civic or charitable work. The American Republic was founded on principles prioritizing and maximizing individuals' rights to live their best life or to enjoy what the farmers called the blessings of liberty. It's the radical equality, liberty for all, not just of rights, but of authority, that the rich and powerful have hated about democracy in America since 1776. They resent Americans' audacity in insisting that we don't need them to tell us how to live. It's this inalienable right of self-direction of each person's opportunity to direct himself or herself and his or her community to the good that the ruling class disdains. With the Declaration and Constitution, our nation's founders handed to us the means with which to preserve this right. Abraham Lincoln wrote of the Declaration as an apple of gold in a silver frame. The Constitution. So must the next conservative president look to these documents when the elites mount their next assault on liberty. Left to our own devices, the American people rejected European monarchy and colonialism just as we rejected slavery. Second-class citizenship for women, mercantilism, socialism, Wilsonian globalism, fascism, communism, and today, wokeism. To the left, these assertions of patriotic self-assurance are just so many signs of our moral depravity and intellectual inferiority, proof that, in fact, we need a ruling elite making decisions for us. But the next conservative president should be proud, not ashamed of Americans' unique culture of social equality and ordered liberty. After all, the countries where Marxist elites have won political and economic power are all weaker, poorer, and less free for it. The United States remains the most innovative and upwardly mobile society in the world. Government should stop trying to substitute its own preferences for those of the people. And the next conservative president should champion the dynamic genius of free enterprise against the grim miseries of elite-directed socialism. A promise of socialism, communism, Marxism, progressivism, fascism, whatever name it chooses, whichever ism they're using today, is simple. Government control of the economy can ensure equal outcomes for all people. The problem is that it has never done so. There is no such thing as the government. There are just people who work for the government and wield its power and who, at almost every opportunity, wield it to serve themselves first and everyone else a distant second. This is not a failing of one nation or socialist party, but inherent in human nature. Nighttime satellite images of the Korean Peninsula famously show the free market South lit up with homes, businesses, and cities electrified from coast to coast. By contrast, communist North Korea is almost completely dark except for the small dot of the capital city, Pyongyang, where a psychotic dictator and his cronies live. The same phenomenon is on display in the infuriating fact that 4 of the 6 richest counties in the United States are suburbs of Washington, D.C., a city infamous for its lack of native productive industries. We see the same corruption expressed on an individual level whenever billionaire climate activists who want to outlaw carbon-fueled transportation fly to A-list conferences on their private jets, or when COVID-19 shut down politicians like former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and California Governor Gavin Newsom were caught at the hair salon or dining at fancy restaurants after moralizing about how everyone must stay home and forego such luxuries during the pandemic. For socialists who are almost always well-to-do, socialism is not a means of equalizing outcomes, but a means of accumulating power. They never get around to helping anyone else. The Soviet Empire was a social and economic failure. North Korea, despite the opulence of its tyrants, is one of the poorest nations in the world. Cuba is so corrupt that its people regularly risk their lives to escape to Florida on rafts. Venezuela was once the richest nation in South America. Today, a decade after a Marxist dictator took over, 94% of Venezuelans live in poverty. Even Socialist Senator Bernie Sanders' home state of Vermont was forced to repeal the state's single-payer healthcare system just 3 years after creating it. In every case, socialist elites promised that if only they could direct the economy, everything would be better. Very quickly, everything got worse. In socialist nation after socialist nation, the only way the government could keep its disgruntled people in line was to surveil and terrorize them. By contrast, in countries with a high degree of economic freedom, elites are not in charge because everyone is in charge. People work, build, invest, save, and create according to their own interests and in service to the common good of their fellow citizens. There is a reason why the private economy hews to the maxim, the customer is always right, while the government bureaucracies are notoriously user-unfriendly, just as there is a reason why private charities are cheerful and government welfare systems are not. It's not because grocery store clerks and PTA moms are good and federal bureaucrats are bad. It's because private enterprise, for profit or non-profit, must cooperate to give to succeed. So as the American people take back their sovereignty, constitutional authority, respect for their families and communities, we should also take back the right to pursue the good life. The next president should promote pro-growth economic policies that spur new jobs and investment, higher wages and productivity. Yes, that agenda should include overdue tax and regulatory reform, but it should go further and include antitrust enforcement against corporate monopolies. It should promote educational opportunities outside the woke-dominated system of public schools and universities, including trade schools, apprenticeship programs, and student loan alternatives that fund students' dreams instead of Marxist academics. Just as important as expanding opportunities for workers and small businesses, the next president should crack down on the crony capitalist corruption that enables America's largest corporations to profit through political influence rather than competitive enterprise and customer satisfaction. I'm sorry, I had trouble getting that one out. Analogs pro-growth reforms for America's voluntary civil society are also in order. America is not an economy, it's a country. Economic freedom is not the only important freedom. Freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and the freedom to assemble also represent key components of the American promise. Today, in addition to the problem of big tech censorship, we see speakers at universities shouted down, parents investigated and arrested for attempting to speak at school board meetings, and donors to conservative causes harassed and intimidated. The next conservative president must defend our First Amendment rights. Best effort. Ultimately, the left does not believe that all men are created equal. They think they are special. They certainly don't think that all people have an unalienable right to pursue the good life. They think only they themselves have such a right, along with a moral responsibility to make decisions for everyone else. They don't think any citizen, state, business, church, or charity should be allowed any freedom until they first bend the knee. I'm very confused already. Okay. This book, this agenda, the entire Project 2025 is a plan to unite the conservative movement and the American people against elite rule and woke culture warriors. Our movement has not been united in recent years, and our country has paid the price. In the past decade, though, the breakdown of the family, the rise of China, the great awakening, who made that word up? Big tech abuses, the erosion of constitutional accountability in Washington have rendered these divisions not just inconvenient, but politically suicidal. Every hour the left directs federal policy and elite institutions, our sovereignty, our constitution, our families, our freedom are a step closer to disappearing. Conservatives have just 2 years and one shot to get this right. With enemies at home and abroad, there's no margin for error. Time is running short. If we fail, the fight for the very idea of America may be lost. But we should take this small window of opportunity we have left to act with courage and confidence, not despair. The last time our nation and movement were so near defeat, we rallied together behind a great leader and great ideas, transcended our differences, rescued our nation, and changed the world. It's time to do it again. Now as then, we know who we are fighting and what we are fighting for our republic, our freedom, and for each other. The next conservative president will enter office on January 20th, 2025 with a simple choice, greatness or failure. It will be a daunting test, but no more so than every generation of Americans has faced and passed. The conservative promise represents the best effort of the conservative movement in 2023 and the next conservative president's last opportunity to save our republic. End notes. And they got little end notes in here where you could where we, as we go through this document in depth after it's read, we'll go to these places and verify their stuff, their views. That's all I can say it is. What is this? I need to see how far are we. Okay, yeah, we're there. So what we're gonna do right now is we're going to take a break from reading. I've got some chores to do around my house, and I want to get this edited and put, well, kind of edited, put pieced together because I've had to stop it a few times. I just want to put this in here. Like, I get why some people could be taken in by the wording, the phrases. It just doesn't fly with me so far. So let me get off of here. Let me end this thing and get this posted for you. I'll be back in a minute, and I'll be back later on tonight with another episode of Reading Part 2.